Hello and welcome to The Exchange. I'm your host, Rob Cox. My guest today is Francis Causey. Francis is one of the filmmakers and writers behind the documentary polemic Heist: Who Stole the American Dream, a film which claims to expose the real truth behind the worldwide economic collapse. First, let's start. Who did actually steal the American dream?
Actually, it was somewhat of a system of people, a group of people that stole the American dream. But we actually trace the downturn in the U.S. economy to a memo that's almost 42 years old.
This is the Powell memo.
Right.
And
right.
Lewis Powell, who became a Supreme Court justice. What did he actually say? And because it's quite an interesting sort of creation story behind the whole problem we have with money in politics today.
Well, Powell was dealing with, he was a corporate lawyer. He was dealing with kind of a militant union atmosphere. If you look at 1971, you've got the civil rights, you've got you've got the counterculture in full effect, and so he really felt that the American enterprise system was under attack, and it's a bit paranoid.
Somewhat understandable from him. I mean, I can't remember. I was like a kid, but a baby,
Sure.
as it were. But I mean, was there an actual threat to the free enterprise system? Was there some response required by business, as it were?
Well, I think their profits were not as good as they had been. I mean, a lot of the nations were bouncing back from World War II and competing, particularly in Asia, were competing with the United States. So whether the threat was real or not, he certainly perceived it as such. He felt like all of the liberal elements of society were getting more of a megaphone from media, for instance. Mm-hmm. And ultimately, he really wanted to go on the offensive, and he went to corporate leaders. I mean, the memo was about inspiring corporate leaders to go and kind of take the megaphone back. Previously public relations departments hadn't been that big of a deal in corporations.
So basically it spawned, as it were, deregulation, the lobbying industry, well, maybe the lobbying industry first and foremost, which led to a lot of actions taken by government to reduce impediments to business, such as deregulation. Is that so? That seems to be the theme.
I mean, so they take this memo, right? The U.S. Chamber of Commerce asked him to write it, and then they bring in the Business Roundtable, and the memo starts bouncing around from boardroom to boardroom. But it's the implementation, actually, of the memo. So corporations, there were a small number of scions of some of industrialized wealth in the United States. They took the memo and they said, we need to go implement this. And they did it through their private foundations. They did it through think tanks. And those groups suggested policy changes that were based on this free market fundamentalism within the memo, which led to the lobbying, which led to the changes in the laws, which led to the Democrats really.
So although Powell was nominated in the early 70s by Nixon to sit on the court, of course, and you had deregulation. A lot of things happened during the Reagan era. This was a bipartisan effort, wasn't it?
Absolutely. I mean, when you look at when Americans sit at home and they watch television, they're scratching their heads about the disconnect between Washington and real everyday people, what's going on. You really kind of, I mean, that's what struck me about Powell. Once the huge money, the corporate money started flooding Washington, it takes a lot more to get reelected. And so this is what leads to kind of a very small number of people having a disproportionate say when it comes to lawmaking. And that was Powell's end game, really was control of law and politics. Right.
Now, but you do have in the film a couple of interesting people. One of the surprises to me was you had Bob Crandall, who ran American Airlines, certainly and benefited, you could argue, from deregulation of the transportation business, the airline business. And yet you've got him, why don't we take a look at the clip? You've got him talking in pretty strong tones about this whole issue.
We are eviscerating our manufacturing capability, all in the name of lower prices, all in the name of free trade, all in the name of the market always knows best. The market doesn't know best.
Those are pretty fighting words from a guy who was CEO of the biggest airline at the time.
Yeah, I mean, he's a very sage voice in the film. I mean, he comes from a working class background. He's obviously lived the American dream, but he really came to believe that deregulation was not good for his industry, but he didn't think it was the broad scale certainly with the financial, with media consolidation. He came to believe that those were things that were not good for the overall health.
One of the things that comes up also in the film is this notion that the media is now timid, doesn't want to ask questions that might be difficult to their corporate masters. I mean, do you really think think that is the case, though. I mean, as a journalist myself, I don't find that I ever fear that the corporate masters will come down.
Right. Well, and you exist in a long form, setting on the show, which is great. But I know, as being a former CNN producer, in a short form, and you take away news gathering capability, you take away, it's easier to put a pundit in the seat than actually go out and cover a story. That's what I began to see.
And you also had Jeff Immelt in there, which was also quite funny. Now, Jeff is not only the CEO of General Electric, which, as you point out in the film, has moved many, many, many thousands of jobs outside of the country, but he's also helped President Obama with this jobs committee.
Right.
I mean, how do you explain that kind of?
I don't think you can explain it, to be honest with you. I mean, it doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. Right. But GE spends more money lobbying the government than any other corporation in the world, and they have a long track record of that. So that's kind of why they're in there.
And so when does the film actually open, or when do you?
The film opens this Friday in Los Angeles and New York, and then it'll be in 10 or other cities. We probably will add some more cities, and then shortly thereafter out on DVD at our website.
Take it down to the Republican convention, let the Koch brothers see it?
Yeah, we would be happy for them to see it.
If you watch this film, you get a sense of that there is this real problem with corporate takeover of Washington. What do you do about it if you take the film's premise?
Well, I mean, a lot of the film is really about organized money kind of having its way, and I think organized people need to kind of organize, whatever that looks like. I don't have a lot of attachment to it, although we do profile some people that actually are making a difference. But there needs to be a top-down, bottom-up kind of squeezing of the system, and I think you'll start to see us move back more towards representational democracy.
Well, I think as long as people are aware of the fact that a lot of their politicians, the people who represent them, are in fact influenced by the money that comes their way, I think that's important.
Yeah, and well, Crandall says it. People don't want to believe it, but votes are for sale.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me.
I'm Rob Cox. Join us again next time for another episode of The Exchange.